compulsion. And today we're talking about compulsion and control of one of the primal desires. And as you probably know, there's three primal desires of a human being. There's a desire for food, there's a desire for power and money, and there's a desire for sex. There's three primal desires in a human being. And it's interesting because Judaism relates to these three primal desires in an interesting way, by prescribing laws and describing an ethical code applying to all three different kinds of desires. So when it comes to food, there are many laws regarding food. All the dietary laws regarding food. What is the purpose of the dietary laws regarding food? And we talked about it when we talked about the compulsion for food. And the idea is to limit different varieties of food, to limit the quantity of food, and to try and limit the appetite for food. The second thing we said is money and power. Again, how does Judaism control money and power in a very basic way? If you can potentially work and struggle for 7 days a week, Judaism comes along and says, you know what, take 1 day off. 1/7 of one's working life is taboo to work. Why? We want to control, we want to restrict this desire for money and power. 7 days a week a person struggling for money and power, Judaism says, you know what, keep it down to 6. Cut it down. 1/7 of your work and your striving for money and power, cut it down by 1/7. Imagine, a person lives 70 years, 10 years of his life was keeping Shabbat. It's amazing if you think about it over the long term. A person lives 70 years, man, 10 years Shabbat, 10 years no struggle for money or power. 10 years, it's a long time. 10 years was not spent struggling for money or power. So it's a tremendous idea behind it. And the third thing is the desire for sex. And here Judaism has various laws. We read these laws on Mincha time of Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year. What do we read in the synagogue? When everyone's mind is, again, we're controlling the desire for food in Yom Kippur, but we're also controlling the desire for sex in Yom Kippur. Why? Because sex is not allowed in Yom Kippur. One of the 5 restrictions on Yom Kippur is the marital act. Twice a year, sex is not allowed. Yom Kippur, and the other day is Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, which is a day of destruction. So the 2 days a year, we restrict this practice. But it's not just the 2 days a year. Also, the Bible tells us, in certain situations, this practice is prohibited. Outside marriage, premarital. Also it's restricted with which partner a person can do this. And in Jewish law, a person can basically do this only through the act of Kiddushin. Kiddushin is the ring ceremony. The act of Kiddushin. It's interesting, because the word for marriage in Judaism is Kiddushin, which means Kiddusha, which comes from the word holiness, Kadosh. We refer to God as holy. So a person can only perform this act through holiness. A person has to be married. It's got to be a legitimate marriage to a legitimate person, to the right partner. So what is Judaism telling us is, number one, Judaism is restricting the practice. So there's control involved over here. And also, Judaism is telling us that it's a holy practice. It can only be performed in a holy way. It's the total opposite of other religions which consider sex as taboo and bad and disgusting. Judaism says, you know what? Sex is the holiest act. Why? Because what is the thing which God does? God creates. We can also be creators in our own way. How do we be creators? We can create human beings. The Talmud says there are 3 partners in a human being: man, his wife, and God. So a person can elevate themselves to the act of creation, to be a partner with God in creation, and that's the holiest act. And that's how a person should view sex, as being a holy act. It's an act of creation primarily, and it's also an act of binding between the couple. You find there are many words. The Rambam describes sex in 3 ways. There are 3 different terms used for sex. The highest level of sex is, it says, Adam yada et chava ishto. Adam, the first man, he knew his wife. What do you mean he knew his wife? He knew his wife. He knew his wife is the biblical term used for the act, the sexual act. He knew his wife. If it's something which leads to intimacy, which leads to the meeting of the minds, it's good, it's holy, it's the highest level. If it's something which is used to cement the relationship between 2 people on a long-term basis, it's the holiest act. It's the act of knowledge. It's a meeting of the minds. And we said the meeting of the minds is going to come before this act. So it's the finishing out, it's the completion of the meeting of the minds. The second level, which Rambam talks about, is Lavo Eleha. From this last week's Torah portion, Judah has relations with Tamar, who was his daughter-in-law, but he didn't know it. He thought she was a zonah, he thought she was a prostitute. Now it's interesting because right at the beginning of the Bible, in the stories which we normally teach to little kids, all these stories, it's interesting because these stories are really sex education. Well, there's a lot of sex in the Bible. And we read it and we don't really realize, because we're reading it, we read it when we're kids, when we're innocent, and we know these stories, and therefore we relate to them even afterwards, we don't really realize what we're saying. Lot had the relations with his daughters, incest. The Bible talks about it in black and white. And we teach it to our kids. What was the reaction of Abraham? Abraham moves away from Lot. We see over here, we teach our children the shame involved in certain things. There's a lot of shame involved. Abraham was so ashamed of his own brother-in-law, his own cousin, that he moved away from him. His own nephew, he was his nephew. Lot was his nephew of Abraham. So he had to move away from him. So we see over here sex education in the Bible, right at the beginning of the Bible. So the Bible teaches us control. So Rambam says the first term for sex, the holiest term for sex is Adam Yadad Chava Ishto. He knew his wife. The second term is coming upon. Lavo Eleha. He came into her. The Bible tells us in many situations, came into her. That's the lower level, but it's still sanctioned in certain situations. It's sanctioned. It's more of an animal act. A person does it because of desire, not because of intimacy, not because he wants to cement the relationship, but because of desire. That's called, in Jewish law, it's called biyah, coming in. But again, there's some biyah which is allowed, and there's biyah which is not allowed. It can potentially be a holy act, but it's a lower level holy act. The third term is the worst, and that's the term referred to in the Bible, which we read on Yom Kippur. It's called Gilui Arayot, uncovering nakedness. The uncovering of nakedness is something which I want to talk about specifically today, and we'll discuss it in a second. But let's go through these three things. So we said before, the three cardinal drives, three main drives of a human being. Food, and so the Torah legislates the laws of kashrut. Want to control your desire for food. Certain foods are allowed, certain foods are not allowed. Certain times, you've got to wait 6 hours sometimes. Imagine, the guy's hungry. I'm hungry. I fancy a cheese sandwich. Okay, 6 hours. You can wait 6 hours. 6 hours? I got to wait 6 hours for a cheese sandwich? Yeah, you got to wait 6 hours. I fancy a cheeseburger. But it's kosher. All the ingredients are kosher. Can't do it. So there's certain laws which the Torah prescribes in order to control this drive, the drive for food. I want to control the drive for food. Now the drive for food is also related to who we are, because the drive for food is a private act between the person and himself. So it's how we relate to ourselves. Now it's interesting because society today is acknowledging that a person views themselves in a certain light, and it creates self-respect. Certain drives for food destroy a person's self-respect. So it's interesting how here the Bible is legislating laws which are between a man and himself. I don't know what you're eating. You don't know what I'm eating. I go home and I eat whatever I want, right? The Torah is not concerned over here between relations between man and his fellow. This is a law between man and himself. The second level is sex. Sex, we said, the Bible legislates who you can have sex with. Very, very controlled. Find the Bible tells us that in one of the rebellions against Moses' leadership in the wilderness, and there were many rebellions against Moses' leadership in the wilderness. Moses called the Jews Am Kashei Oref, a very stiff-necked people, a stiff-necked, very stubborn people. And that's one of the secrets of Jewish survival. But it's also, if it's used, obstinacy is one of the worst traits as well. It's one of the best traits, secret of our survival. But if it's used for the wrong reasons, the person who's obstinate doesn't get very far. We find the Talmud tells us, what do you write a Sefer Torah with? What is a person meant to use as the pen to write a Sefer Torah with? So the Talmud says, you're meant to use a bamboo shoot, which is what Sephardim use to write a Sefer Torah, as a bamboo. Ashkenazim use a quill, which is made from feather. But we use a bamboo. Why? So the Talmud says, because bamboos shake in the wind. They bend with the wind. They're not obstinate. Cedar trees, in a gale force wind, would break and bend and completely be toppled over. whereas a bamboo would survive. Why? Because they bend with the wind. So here the Talmud is telling us, don't be too obstinate. On the other hand, obstinacy sometimes is very good. So family purity, we find, one of the rebellions against Moses, it says the Jews were crying, Al mishpechotam. They were crying outside their tents for their families. What are they crying for their families? So Rashi says, the commentator Rashi says, they're crying because they weren't allowed to marry into their families. A person was not allowed to marry their sister anymore. The Torah legislated. In Egypt, incest was very prevalent. The pharaohs themselves, the pharaonic line went through the women. For a boy to be a king of Egypt had to marry his sister, because the line went through the daughters. So incest was legalized. Not only was incest legalized, but in the royal family, incest was the way to go. And we find in the plague of the firstborn, it says there were many firstborns because they would fool around. A man would have relations with many different women. So they're all the children, once-off relationships, they're all his firstborns. And she would go to another man, and he'd have a firstborn with her. And therefore they're all firstborns. Many people died in the plague, firstborn of the men. So there were many, many firstborns. So that's so the Jews. One of the revolts the Jews had in the wilderness was against these very laws. It was just too restrictive. They couldn't get used to it in such a short time. Today we take it for granted because the vast amount of society is interesting. How most societies recognize that these are the norms. Okay, today there's a bit of bending of the rules, but still, there is a recognition of the norms. These are the norms. Still, one man, one woman. Still, these are the norms. Where do these norms come from? They come from the Torah. They come from the Bible. Moses just gave it to Bnei Israel. And what happens? There's a revolt. They're crying. They can't take these laws. They're very restrictive laws. What are these laws for? What are they trying to do? They're trying to perfect our relationships with other people. In other words, there's a lot of abuse in the world. And we abuse relationships with people. A man might abuse his relationship with his daughter. A man might abuse his relationships with his sister. All these things are different forms of abuse. We abuse other people. This is one of the forms of abuse of other people. A person goes to a harlot or a prostitute. He's abusing her in a sense. He's lowering her value as a woman, as a human being. He's using her as an object. So these are forms of abuse with other people which the Torah is trying to cut down on. Shabbat is a law between man and God. So on Shabbat, again, which is constricting our desire for power, desire for money, Shabbat is a law between man and God. So we have three different laws, three different ideas. Kashrut is focusing on the act of eating, trying to control the act of eating, which is one of the primary desires of man. Who is it focused on? It's focused on the self, on a person themselves. Why? Trying to build up the person, trying to teach a person self-control and discipline. Controlling, restricting sex is also building up the person's self-discipline, but it's also a way of abusing power, abusing other people. So Torah says, you know what, treat your fellow man with respect. Treat your fellow woman with respect. A person's going to treat a fellow human being with respect. We're created in the image of God. We are not just objects to be utilized for our own pleasures. Human beings are not objects. And thirdly, Shabbat comes along to restrict the drive for power and money. But it's also a way of enabling us to have a day of spirituality in our lives. So every 7 days we have one day devoted to spirituality. We're trying to renew our relationship with God. So they're very, very powerful ideas over here. Three different desires. One of the important parts of Judaism is a concept of tzniut. What is tzniut? Tzniut is being described as modesty. Now most people, when they talk about tzniut, they normally think of the length of one's sleeves, the length of one's dress, the length of one's neckline. That's tzniut. Tzniut is modesty. But there's a very, very powerful idea behind this idea of tzniut. I don't want to go through the laws of tzniut. I want to go through the philosophy of tzniut. What is the philosophy of tzniut? And one of the dimensions of tzniut is the idea of kiddusha. Kiddusha means holiness. And we find that Judaism is trying to teach us to find holiness in every aspect of our lives. We talked about this many times. The idea of Judaism is to elevate the mundane. So eating something, you're elevating the act of eating. You're doing a form of work. On Shabbat, we elevate the act of work. Certain kinds of work we don't do on Shabbat. We're elevating work. Sex, we're trying to elevate the act of sex. Kiddushin. We said marriage is called Kiddushin, making it holy. So every mundane act, Judaism is trying to raise the mundane act to a higher level of Kedusha, of holiness. And the Torah tells us, there's a whole parasha, there's a whole section of Torah which we read one Shabbat, we devote one Shabbat to the laws of holiness. The Bible tells us, Kedoshim Tiyu, be holy, Ki Kadosh Ani Hashem. We believe in a God who is holy. We have to understand the concept. What is the concept of holiness? God is holy, God is good, and God is holy. What is God is holy? What is holiness? So Rashi says, holiness is abstaining from immorality. Holiness is an automatic thing. We don't really think about this during the day. But if a person engages in certain acts, what happens is they themselves feel unholy. They themselves know, and deep down we all know, we have an instinct that we feel low. We feel low. And our desires are in control. A person does the acts and they're involved in the acts. What happens is they themselves feel like they've debased themselves. And once a person loses a sensitivity, obviously they lose it, like anything else. A person does something over and over again, they just lose the sensitivity. But a person does something once, twice, whatever it is, they still have that sensitivity. So there's an idea of holiness, which the Talmud says, Hevu perushim min arayot. Separate yourself from immorality. Separate oneself from immoral acts, and that is holiness. That is the definition of holiness. And how does a person separate oneself? And one of the ideas is sniut, which is modesty. Now, there's an interesting idea of modesty. How does modesty relate to holiness? Now, there's an interesting concept. When a person does a good deed, what is one of the highest levels of good deeds? And the answer is, if a good deed is done in public, it wasn't done for the right motives. If a good deed is done in private, you can assume that it was done with the highest motives. Why? A person does a good deed in order to flaunt the good deed. Obviously, certain things we have to do in public. Praying with a minyan is one of the ideas of doing something in public. But certain things a person doesn't have to do in public. For example, a person wants to donate some money. They can do it in public, they can do it in private. Again, depends on the intent. Today we want people to donate in public, to encourage other people to donate. But the higher levels are usually things done in private. So there's an interesting hypothesis over here. This is Rabbi Soloveitchik, who was one of the great rabbis in the last generation. He says that holiness thrives in private. Holiness thrives in obscurity. Holiness thrives through modesty. And we're going to give different examples in Jewish law. It's interesting how many examples there are in Jewish law of holiness thriving in modesty. So holiness flourishes only in the hidden. And it seems God is the most holy, and God is the most hidden. It's one of the proofs. God is the most holy, and God is the most hidden. The holiest place in Jewish law. What is the holiest place in Jewish law? The Holy of Holies. The Holy of Holies. Where is the Holy of Holies? The Kodesh HaKodeshim. The Holy of Holies was in the temple. No one was allowed into the Holy of Holies. Nobody was allowed into the Holy of Holies except once a year on Yom Kippur, where all three things came together. The holiest day of the year, the holiest person, and the holiest place. Three things come together in Yom Kippur. The Kohen Gadol, the high priest, was allowed into the Holy of Holies only on the holiest day of the year. Why was it restricted? Because the holiest place is not something which is open for everyone to see and visit. It's interesting, it's totally opposite. And again, today there are many pilgrimages to holy places. Here we go, we're meant to go 3 times a year to the temple. But yet the holiest place were restricted. Access was restricted to the holiest place. Why was access restricted to the holiest place? And the answer is because holiness thrives on the hidden. That's what the Torah is teaching us. There's holiness in there. Holiness thrives on modesty. And we're going to see different examples. Another example for hiddenness is a prerequisite for the holiness of a Sefer Torah. A Sefer Torah, a Torah scroll. We read this Torah scroll 4 times a week. Twice on Shabbat. Shabbat morning we read it. Shabbat afternoon we read it. On Mondays and Thursdays. The rabbi said a person should not go 3 days without learning Torah. A person goes 3 days without learning Torah, it's like they forget it already. They forget who they are, they forget what they are. A person's got to rejuvenate themselves. Every 3 days, a person's got to rejuvenate themselves by hearing Torah. A person's got to listen to the Torah. A person's got to remember who they are. We have to remember that we're Jewish. We have a Torah, we have a moral code, we have a guide, we have different ways of climbing the ladders of holiness. And yet, as we take out the Torah scroll, it is prohibited to touch the Torah scroll. It's an interesting law. We have a special cloth we use to turn the Torah scroll. The Ashkenazi Torah, you don't touch the Torah scroll at all, you hold the handles. The Sephardic Torah, you've got to hold the scroll itself to turn them. So we have a special cloth to hold the Torah scroll. So we have, it's interesting, the idea of familiarity breeds contempt. The Talmud, when it talks about this, talks about not holding the Torah scroll aruma, not holding the Torah scroll which is naked. Don't hold a naked Torah scroll. Amazing language. What is it? A Torah scroll is a living being, it's naked? Talmud says, don't hold a naked Torah scroll. Why? Again, holiness thrives on modesty. Torah scroll is naked. Cover it up before you hold it. Always keep it covered unless you're using it. Only certain times we uncover it. We're not allowed to uncover it any time. Leave it on show, uncovered. It's not kavod, it's not honor for the Torah scroll. The Greeks, man, this is very topical because we're Hanukkah. The battle between the Jews and the Greeks was not just a physical battle, it was a spiritual battle. It was a battle of ideas, of cultures. Different cultures clashed. The Greeks viewed the human body as pure aesthetics. And that's why the ancient Olympics was instituted by the Greeks. The Greeks instituted the Olympics, the might of the body, and in those days the Olympics were in the nude. I mean, today they're almost nude, but not quite. But in those days, the Greeks had the Olympics in the nude. Why? They wanted to demonstrate and show their body. A beautiful body, aesthetics. That was prized possession of someone, a beautiful body. So they were obsessed by beauty. And their notion is that beauty does not thrive in hiddenness. Beauty must be flaunted. Beautiful objects require that they be displayed and admired. So if you just view the body as an object of beauty, the body must be flaunted and demands exposure. And the Greeks introduced the gymnasia into Israel, where sports were engaged in the nude. By the way, the Talmud says, in those days many men would undergo reverse plastic surgery to uncircumcise themselves. Many men would do it just because they had to be in the gymnasia in the nude. They didn't want to show that they were Jewish. They wanted to hide their Judaism. So that's interesting. That's one of the things which we celebrate, the Hasmonean Revolution, the Maccabees, is that we do not view the body as aesthetic, purely aesthetic. Even though the Bible praises the beauty of certain women in the Bible. Sarah was praised for her beauty. Rivka was praised for her beauty, the wife of Isaac. Rachel was praised for her beauty. So there is a concept of beauty in the Torah. There is the concept of aesthetics. We do like aesthetics. We like a beautiful building. But only if it's used for good and holy purposes. So beauty is important. King Solomon says, and this is the last line of Eshet Chayil, which is the song in praise of the mother of the house, which we sing on Friday night. Praise of the mother of the house. He wrote it for his own mother, Batsheva. And the song of praise, what does it end of? Sheker hachen vehevel hayofi. Beauty is vanity. Sheker, it's false. Vehevel hayofi. Beauty is vanity and false. Imagine saying beauty is false and vanity. The Greeks would say, hey, this guy's the wisest man in the world. This guy's the biggest idiot. You can see the clash between Judaism, Jewish philosophy, and Greek philosophy. King Solomon says the main thing is Yirat Hashem, the fear of God. Beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. Beauty dissolves. After a while, beauty is just skin deep. The main thing is what's inside. And that's Jewish philosophy. And that's why it says, by Rachel it says, she was Yefat Toar v'Yifat Mareh. She was beautiful of form and beautiful to look at. Why the double language? So the commentaries say she was beautiful on the outside and she was beautiful on the inside. So there's two kinds of beauties over here. So when the Bible talks about people as being beautiful, who knows? Is it talking about internal beauty or is it talking about external beauty? There's an internal beauty which is more important than the external beauty. It doesn't matter what a person looks like. It's what's inside that counts. There's a beautiful story. It says one of the rabbis was a hunchback. One of the greatest rabbis, Rabbi Yoshua, who was a genius in philosophy and astronomy and math. And he had many debates with the Greek philosophers, and he always won his debate. He's one of the few rabbis who could win them in any argument they had. Any topic of science, anything. Rabbi Yoshua was one of the greatest geniuses in the world. And he was acknowledged as one of the greatest geniuses by the Greeks and by the Romans. So he's in Rome. He has all these group debates. He's a hunchback. He's a very ugly-looking gentleman. So one of the girls, one of the king's daughters, comes to him and says, I don't understand why God would put such wisdom in such an ugly person. She's very rude to him. Such wisdom, such an ugly person. Why? Why would God do that? He said, tell me, he says, where does your father store his wine? Does he store his wine in gold vessels or in vessels of clay, earthenware? Where does he store his best wines? So she goes home and she looks and she does research and she says, she sees her father stores the best wines in barrels or in flasks made of clay. So she takes all the wine and she puts them in golden vessels. The best wine should be in golden vessels. What happens? After a couple of weeks, the father goes crazy. Who ruined my wine? Who ruined my wine? The wine went bad in gold vessels. Wine will go bad. There's some sort of chemical reaction. And with gold, the wine goes bad in gold. So she finds out it's his daughter. He goes to the daughter. He says, why do you do this? She said, this rabbi told me to do it. So take your father's expensive old wine and put it in gold vessels and see what happens. So he goes to the rabbi to complain. And the rabbi said, I want to teach your daughter a lesson. That it's not the container which is important. The gold container can ruin the wine. Beauty, how much? It's interesting, how many people have been ruined by their own beauty? One of the cases is this week's Torah portion, where it talks about Joseph as being handsome. Joseph's handsomeness nearly ruined him, because honey attracts bees. On the one hand, a person can be ruined by their own vanity. A person's own vanity can ruin them. It's unfortunate. Many handsome, many beautiful people are ruined by their own vanity. They ruin themselves, they kill themselves with their own vanity. Their illusion that beauty is the main thing. So Judaism says, you know what? Pirkei Avot says, we just learned the last series, Al tistakel b'kankan. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, Rabbi Judah the Prince, the author of the Mishnah says, Al tistakel b'kankan. Don't look at the packaging. Packaging is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Don't look at the packaging. Look at what's inside the packaging. This is genius. This is great advice. Don't look at the packaging. There's new packaging, which is old things inside. And there's old packaging, which has new things inside. A person's not allowed to look at the packaging. So that's part of the idea of modesty, is it's not the outside which is important. It's not the aesthetics. Aesthetics are good. It's an additional value. But it's not the critical criteria. Another example where holiness is hidden. We find Moses at the burning bush, right? Everyone seen the movie? Moses at the burning bush. You got to read the book. Moses at the burning bush. What happens? He goes to the burning bush. And God calls out to the burning bush, take off your shoes, the land is holy. He takes off his shoes. In those days they had very long garments. The cloaks would cover their feet. So it wasn't like his feet were revealed. What else does he do? It says, Moses hides his face. He hides his face from the awesomeness, the awe of seeing God, the holiness. Obviously he wasn't seeing God, he was seeing a kind of imagery or whatever it was, illusion or whatever. You can't see God. God has got no form, no shape. But just the holiness in the bush was just too much for him. Why wasn't he looking at the holiness? We find this concept that it's forbidden to stare at holiness. Interesting concept in Jewish law. We see this also at Mount Sinai. It says when the Torah was given, when the Ten Commandments were given, the people ate and drank, and they stared at holiness. Who are the ones who stared at holiness? The two sons of Aaron who were later killed. They stared at holiness. They are not allowed to stare at holiness. Why? Holiness thrives behind the scenes. That's an interesting idea. So Moses reacts with modesty. How? He hides his face. He's not allowed to look at the divine. He was scared to look at God. He's overawed. So in the presence where a person is overawed with holiness, what you do is you close your eyes. A person's overawed with holiness, the reaction is close one's eyes. Don't see, don't look. Why? Modesty. Holiness thrives in modesty. Another example. This is a beautiful example. The 6th chapter of Isaiah, we say this in our prayers, talks about the seraphim. The seraphim are seraphs. What's a seraph? A seraph is a kind of angel. All these pictures of angels flying around, they're based on the story of Isaiah. Isaiah describes angels in great details, the seraphim. There's many different kinds of angels. It's one of the angels described in Isaiah. Isaiah says, they surround the throne of God and they shout. What do they shout? Kadosh, 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 Hashem Tzvaot. Holy, holy, holy is God. Chant, the same chant of the angels. We rob this from the angels. When we do Kedusha in the middle of the Amidah and the repetition, we say, holy, holy, holy is God of the hosts. We took this line from Isaiah, the line out of the words of these angels, the seraphim. Now Isaiah goes into details. What do these seraphim look like? So he describes each angel as having 6 wings. What does the angel do with 6 wings? If they have 6 wings, you think the wings are there to fly, right? Well, that's what angels do. With 2 wings, the angel covers its face. With 2 wings, the angel covers its feet. And with 2 wings, the angel flies. Again, we see the idea of modesty over here. It's not just in the realms, the physical realms, but in the spiritual realms. When you're dealing with holiness, anything to do with holiness requires covering. Anything to do with getting close to God. You're in awe of God. How does a person exhibit their awe of God? It's interesting, that's one of the differences between Jewish culture. I grew up in England. Same thing happened over here. I went to court once in America. Well, obviously it wasn't in Highland Park. In Highland Park they used the Jews covering their head. One of the courts, they told me, remove your hat. In England, that's the custom. You go to see the Queen, you're meant to take off your hat. It's a sign of awe, is taking off, uncovering. In Jewish law, it's the opposite. That's why the Hasidim wear these big hats. The sign of awe is, the bigger the kippah, the bigger the sign of awe. The bigger the head covering, the bigger the sign of awe. It's related. It's meant to be related. So tzniut, it's modesty. The angels, even angels who have no evil desires, can you imagine? 6 wings, 2 cover their face. They can't see God. Angels can't see God. Or they cover their feet with 2 and they fly with 2. What else? We find the idea of modesty is showing an aspect that inside the human being there's holiness. Within every human being there is a soul. We cover up. A human being is like a Sefer Torah. You don't leave the Sefer Torah exposed. Where do we see the human being is equivalent to a Sefer Torah? So Talmud says, if a Jew witnesses a terrible sight of a Sefer Torah being burnt by the enemy, what are you meant to do? You're meant to rip your clothes. If a Jew witnesses a desecration of a Sefer Torah, witnessing it, he has to rip his clothes. So Talmud says, from there we learn out that if you witness a Jew dying, you also have to tear your clothes. Why? Because a Jew is a walking Torah. Where do we see this? We see this in the story of Joseph. The Bible tells us when the Jews were traveling through the wilderness, they were carrying 2 boxes. One was a box with the 10 Commandments, the Ark, and the other box was the box with the bones of Joseph inside them. They had a mitzvah. Joseph makes them promise, when you leave Egypt, you take my bones with you to bury me in. There was a big thing in the news recently about the tomb of Joseph, right? The Israelis lost the tomb of Joseph. The Palestinians took it back and they reinvented it as the tomb of a sheikh. They made it into a mosque. They made the synagogue into a mosque. And the whole world, not a peep. Not a condemnation, the United Nations, nothing. They desecrated one of our holy sites and no one said a word. And that's very common. We've been through this through the thousands of years. When Jews are desecrated, everything's Jewish is desecrated, no one says a word. When something else happens, the Jews are always to blame. The Jews are always the scapegoats of the world of mankind. It's interesting. And that was the suffering servant. When Isaiah talks about the suffering servant, I'm going to talk about it on Monday, 10 a.m. The missionaries use this all the time, the suffering servant. Who is the suffering servant of God? The Jewish people are the suffering servant of God. And just look at the United Nations record and you'll see who the suffering servant is. Who is the one nation which is singled out for more abuse than any other nation is the Jewish people. the suffering servant of God. So what happened was, when people came to the wilderness to view the Jews walking through the wilderness, say, hey, well, these 2 boxes. So they say, wow, one of the boxes is the stones on which the 10 Commandments, God gave us 10 Commandments. One of these boxes contained the stone of the 10 Commandments. Say, fine, we understand. You respect your law. Very good. What is in the other box? The bones of Joseph. We don't understand. Why are you equating bones with the holy law? So the answer is, this one kept what's written in this one. A human being who keeps the holy law intrinsically becomes a walking holy law. Interesting concept. We are walking Torahs. We have to strive to be walking and talking Torahs. We have to strive to internalize the Torah. The idea is not to buy the book and put it in your shelf. The idea is to try and internalize the book. We are walking Torahs. So that's a concept which is very, very important. That there's a concept of holiness, internal holiness of a human being. So we believe that man is not just a biological chance which just happened. We believe that man was created in the image of God, which means that every single human being has a spark of holiness within them. We said that holiness thrives on modesty. Holiness thrives on obscurity. We have to obscure the spark. How do we obscure it? By covering it up. A human being is a walking Torah. You're not allowed to flaunt the Torah. You have to cover the Torah until you need it. So that's one of the concepts of tzniut, which is linked to holiness. It's a concept linked to holiness. The other concept is linked to kavod, honor. There's a concept of honor. The Talmud tells us that one of the concepts of honor is the garments of a person are the honor of the person. The garment is an honor to the person. A person buys a nice suit. A person buys nice clothes. That's an honor to the person. And this holds true for man. Dignity, just like holiness, thrives in obscurity. If you can imagine if the Queen of England would come out and flaunt herself in public, who would respect her and honor her? She decided to appear in Playboy magazine. Who would respect the Queen of England anymore? It's an interesting idea. Respect is tied to modesty. Modesty acquires respect and honor. For example, all the time. A person flaunts. There's many ways of flaunting oneself. A person brags about themselves all the time. You know how great I am, I have this, and I have that, and I've done this, and I've done that. Who's the classic example? Haman in the story of Purim. He comes home, and he flaunts everything. Tells his wife how great he is, and great, and great, and great, and great, and great. And what happened to him? The king destroys him. The person flaunts, brags. We have to be modest, even in flaunting what we have. A person has to be modest. Modesty is a very, very important idea. So tzniut is not just flaunting one's body. It's also involved in flaunting one's wealth. A person shouldn't live an ostentatious lifestyle. A person shouldn't flaunt their achievements. A person should be modest. People like modest people. People don't have any respect for people who flaunt themselves. So tzniut, modesty, brings in not just holiness, but also kavod, brings in respect and honor. It's one of the tools to acquire respect and honor. And the third concept of modesty is involved with privacy. Privacy is a very, very, very important concept. Privacy is an idea where we imitate God. We have to imitate God. We have to walk in God's ways. We have to imitate God. At Mount Sinai, we find there was what's called Gilui HaShekhinah. God revealed himself to mankind. And he revealed himself to mankind. He communicated with Moses and with the emerging nation of Israel. And just like when we communicate, just like God, when God communicated with us, he revealed himself to us. When we communicate to others, we have to also reveal ourselves to a certain point. But there are limits. Just like God did not reveal himself in entirety, he just revealed a little part of himself, little drop of himself. So also when we talk to other people, we can only reveal ourselves to a small amount. So we have to imitate God. So we find this tzniut, even in communication with others, privacy is very, very important. We find that one of the concepts of a human being is inscrutability. It's hard to know what's going on in someone else's head. We're inscrutable. What does that mean? That means there is privacy, automatic privacy. There's an inbuilt sense of privacy, that a person doesn't reveal everything that's going on in their heads. God doesn't want a human being to reveal everything that's going on in their heads. It can be detrimental, not just to them, but it can be detrimental to others as well. So there's a concept of privacy in communication as well. We don't reveal everything. There's a concept of modesty in communication as well. So that's sniut. Sniut is a very, very important concept. But the whole idea of sniut is, the Torah talks about gilui arayot, uncovering nakedness. What's the opposite of uncovering nakedness? Covering nakedness. Where do we find the concept of covering nakedness? Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve realized the dangers involved in going around naked. They realized that they were naked. And they had to cover themselves, otherwise certain urges become irresistible, and certain urges become animal-like, and certain urges have to be controlled. And they realized that. It's interesting because the Talmud says that an individual who is setting up a bedroom in a house, talking about married people, setting up their bedroom, what do they have to do? So the Talmud discusses which direction the bed has to face. When you're setting up a bedroom in your house, take a compass with you. Coming to it. Discussion. One of the rabbis said, he says, whenever a rabbi asks you a question, always tell him there's a debate. There's a debate. What's the answer to this question? There's a debate. There's two opinions. Usually there's at least two opinions mentioned in the Talmud and in the Mishnah. There's always a debate. So over here, a person's going to set up a bedroom. Can you imagine a Jewish law? When you set up your bedroom, which direction do you put your bed? What's going on up here? So normally a person would fit their bed according to the contours of the room. The room is this way, so you put the bed this way. The room is that way, you put the bed that way. The Talmud says north and south. A person's got to put their bed between north and south. So at first glance, when a person's looking at this law, so you know what? I don't understand this law. What's going on north and south, between north and south? Or maybe it has something to do with the direction of Jerusalem. You should put your bed facing the east when you're having relations, not honor to Jerusalem. Nachmanides, Ramban, Moses ben Nachman, not Maimonides but Nachmanides, gives a very interesting idea to try and explain this law between the north and the south. And he says, the northern hemisphere, we're living in New York, right? What happens when there are north winds, like today? Freezing. What happens when there are south winds? Balmy. It's warm. Beautiful. And this is true in the southern hemisphere, only it's the other way around. So Ramban makes a beautiful observation over here. When a person is living between north and south, depends where the winds are blowing. Thomas says, put your bed between north and south. Don't be too hot, and don't be too cold. It's an amazing concept. It's a Jewish concept. The Talmud says it's got to be between north and south, because when a person approaches conjugal relations between husband and wife, between cold and hot, a person should have their mindset also between cold and hot, between north and south. It should not be cold, it shouldn't be frigid, but it shouldn't be overly passionate either. A person has to be in total control. Because when one loses control, one is likely to abuse. When a person loses control, they abuse the other party. So a person has to be in control. Not too hot, but also not too cold. So that's a very, very beautiful idea. This north-south business speaks volumes about what is intended. The idea of discipline, moderation, but primarily the idea of giving pleasure to the partner and not taking pleasure. The concept of giving, it's very important. The foundation of a marriage is giving. Extramarital relations, on the other hand, are the opposite. Taking for oneself. I want, I need. And that's the difference between the concept of Jewish love and the concept of Greek love. Greek love is desire and taking. Jewish love is commitment and giving. And that's why so many marriages today break down. There's love, 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 all the way to divorce. They love each other to death. Why? Because their concept of love is satisfaction. I have to satisfy myself. I love in order to satisfy myself. The Jewish concept of love is love in order to give satisfaction, in order to give commitment, in order to give to others. And that's why in Judaism the Bible puts love of a child first. The first time the word love is mentioned is when it says Abraham loved his son Ishmael. He loved his child. Loving a child, why is love of a child more important? Because that's where we learn the meaning of love. Love is commitment and giving. A parent loves their child. It's unconditional commitment. You don't divorce your child. Well, some parents today do maybe. Some children divorce their parents. It's crazy ideas. But it's unconditional commitment. You don't swap your child for someone else's child. It's unconditional commitment. That's the idea of love. So in a mutual relationship, abuse is not allowed. Rape is not allowed in a marriage. A man is not allowed to rape his wife. So the halacha says, put your bed between north and south. And it's interesting, there's not allowed to play games in marriage. Availability, games of availability, is not allowed to be played in a marriage. Person says, you know what, I'm not available tonight. I'm not available tonight. Unless there's a good reason, we're not allowed to play games of availability with a spouse. So we have a mitzvah to satisfy one another in marriage. There's a mitzvah in the Torah. The Torah says, and it's a mitzvah on a man more than on a woman. Why? Because in those days especially it was more the man who would abuse in a relationship. The Torah tells a man, don't abuse your wife. Satisfy your wife. A man has a mitzvah to satisfy his wife, which is the only limit in Jewish law on how many women a person can marry. In Torah law, the only limit on how many women a person can marry is he's got to marry, he can only marry as many women as he can satisfy. How many women can a person satisfy? So today, obviously, there's laws. Rabbi Gershom made a law over 1,000 years ago, one man, one wife. But prior to that, it was very similar to the Muslim system. Actually, the Muslim system is modeled on the Jewish system. A person could have as many women as he could satisfy. But how many women can a person satisfy? How many women can a person support? A person can have as many wives as he can support already. That's already a limit in itself. The Torah confers obligations on a newlywed husband. What does it say? A man has to be clean to his house for the first year. And he has to gladden the wife who he has taken. So it's a tremendous mitzvah, which should really spill over to the rest of the marriage as well. If a person has a good flavor the first year, that's very critical. The first year is very, very critical in building a solid foundation. If there's a good flavor the first year, hopefully it spills over into the rest of the marriage. What does it mean to gladden his wife? So very bluntly, the Ravad says, the Ravad was a very holy person. Rabbi Abraham ben David, on the Rambam, about 900 years ago, very famous rabbi. He says to gladden the heart of his wife is to satisfy her sexually. Interesting. These old rabbis were not scared of anything. They could say things bluntly. The husband has the obligation to leave his wife pleased. And this is a very, very important idea. And it works both ways. It's not that sex creates love, it's love that creates sex. It's the Jewish view is what leads to sex. Sex is the most sacred. It's the ultimate experience. It's the experience where a person knows his wife. A person has to build up to that experience. It's a climactic experience. Today, unfortunately, a climb Mount Everest, a person climbs Mount Everest in an artificial way. It's like taking a helicopter to Mount Everest. So actually physically climbing the mountain, the person just says, you know what, I'm going to take the helicopter. You can go up in the ski lift or you can climb the mountain. Judaism says, don't go up in the ski lift. You're losing the flavor. Build up to that relationship. If you have all the other ingredients, everything's going to last. If you don't have the other ingredients, it's not going to last. So it's a high which we have to build up to. So it's not sex that creates love, it's love that creates sex. Sex is something which is very sacred, as opposed to Christianity, which views sex as degrading. According to Rabbi Yaakov Emden, there's a blessing on sex. What's the blessing on sex? There are 7 blessings before a person gets married, but there are 2 before he puts the ring on the finger. Those 2 blessings are the blessing on sex. And according to some opinions, there's another blessing before the first act of intercourse. There's a blessing to be said. It's an Ashkenazi view. Come to me before you get married. I'll tell you about it. There's an Ashkenazi view that there's a blessing before the first act of intercourse. Rabbi Yaakov Emden says, every night there's a blessing before we go to sleep, a blessing on the Shema, which is our affirmation of faith and our undertaking towards our responsibilities. And he says the reason for that is it percolates through our subconscious. Whatever we say before we go to sleep percolates through our subconscious. That's why it's good to say the Shema before going to sleep. And part of that blessing is, Tehi mitati shlema lefanecha. May my bed be complete before you. Rabbi Yaakov Emden says, what do you mean, may my bed be complete? What does it mean? This is a prayer for successful, harmonious fusion between man and wife. May my bed be complete. Jacob's bed was complete until Reuven came along and mixed up his beds. This week's Torah portion. Whatever that means. We have to understand what that means. But there's a concept, the fusion between husband and wife must be harmonious. That's a blessing on sex. According to Rabbi Yaakov Emden, that is the blessing on sex. Rav Eliyahu Lapian, one of the great ethical rabbis of our generation, made the following interesting observation. When a person goes fishing and catches salmon, what happens? He flays it, seasons it, grills it, and then devours it. Then afterwards he says, gee, do I love salmon? He catches it, flays it, roasts it, grills it, seasons it, and says, I love salmon. What he's saying is really inaccurate. He loves himself. If he loved the fish, he wouldn't have handled it like that. What he really means to say is he loves himself. He loves himself so much that he manipulates the fish in order to feed his love. In the same sense, for a person to say, I love my spouse, and then do nothing but mishandle him or her, is the same as mishandling the salmon. That means a person loves themselves. Well, the primary charge of marriage is to jump from me to we. And one reason for the breakdown of marriage today is people don't know how to jump from me to we. We don't know how to jump from me to we. So a husband should take care of his wife, the wife should take care of the husband, and then instead of isolating out into their own compartments, the person has to build togetherness. That's a very important idea. And that's the part of the conjugal experience, is to build togetherness. Where do we find this? Right at the beginning of the Torah. The Torah says, Al ken ya'azov adam ish aviv et imo. A person's got to separate from his father and mother. V'dabek b'ishto, cling to his wife. Yu b'sar echad, and they will be one flesh. It's the act of making one flesh. It's the act of feeling together. It's the act of uniting. It's the act of feeling part of one or the other. Dr. Viktor Frankl was a well-known psychiatrist. He talks about couples who expect to climb a new high every night. And the question is, after you climb Mount Everest, which mountain do you go to next? So he tells of a couple who came to him complaining that their sexual relationship was dead. They had a very good marriage, they just didn't desire anymore. They had no desire anymore. So he had them medically checked up and was convinced there was nothing wrong with them. So when they came to him, he gave them some medication and he told them to take it for a week. But during that week, he says, you can hug each other and kiss each other, but you're not allowed to go to bed together. And come back in a week. And the medication he gave them was just a sugar pill. Nothing. Placebo. They came back after a week and the guy tells him, he says, Dr. Frankl, he says, I feel very badly. We kept your formula, we took the medication every day, and all we did, we just embraced. However, last night we got carried away. And not only did we have an experience, we also enjoyed it for the first time in a long time. So Frankl, who is an Austrian, in his own way pretended to lose his temper, and he says, I said no sex. I can't say very well. And no sex is no sex. Here I am, I'm giving you medication now for 2 weeks. And this time make sure you keep my prescription. No sex for 2 weeks. A week later, he gets a call from the young man. He says, we try to keep your advice. We couldn't control ourselves. We had a great time on Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. And today is Wednesday, we're going to do it again. To hell with you. So that's the secret. It's a very, very important secret. Whatever we have, we take for granted. And then we look for the next high. And this is the secret in Judaism is, Judaism says don't abuse. Because when a person abuses, they go and look for something else to have fun with. The person doesn't appreciate what they have. So what Judaism does is restricts the sexual act. It's allowed, but it's restricted. When it's restricted, a person appreciates it and looks forward to it. The laws of marital purity basically are 2 weeks out of every month. Boy, it's hard. It's harder to be married than be single, I think. It's harder to control oneself within marriage, because here you are, you're married after all. You're working hard, you're supporting your family, whatever it is. 2 weeks out of every month, a man and wife are not allowed even to touch each other. Jewish law. It's a very hard law. Why? Because that act of control brings a person to look forward to the next honeymoon. Because 2 weeks later, there's going to be a high. 2 weeks later, there's going to be a honeymoon. We don't need Viktor Frankl to tell us what to do. We don't need to go and ask for placebos or ask for his advice. We have it inbuilt in Jewish law. It's a new honeymoon. And the Talmud says that's one of the reasons for this law is to teach us to appreciate what they have and also teach us control. When a person has the control, a person appreciates and looks forward to the honeymoon. And that's the concept of Jewish concept of controlling this primal desire. There's a control. It's a very, very enjoyable experience. It's a very holy experience. But without control, we burn ourselves out. Without control, everything dissolves. Okay, I think I better stop here. And I wish you a very happy Hanukkah. And hopefully we'll continue. Same time, same channel. Don't forget we have a special class on Monday morning at 10 a.m. on how to answer missionaries. So please, hopefully... Today we're talking about compulsion. And today we're talking about compulsion and control of one of the primal desires. And as you probably know, there's 3 primal desires of a human being. There's a desire for food. There's a desire for power and money. And there's a desire for sex. There's 3 primal desires in a human being. And it's interesting because Judaism relates to these 3 primal desires in an interesting way, by prescribing laws and describing an ethical code applying to all 3 different kinds of desires. So when it comes to food, there are many laws regarding food, all the dietary laws regarding food. What is the purpose of the dietary laws regarding food? And we talked about the compulsion for food. And the idea is to limit different varieties of food, to limit the quantity of food, and to try and limit the appetite for food. The second thing we said is money and power. Again, how does Judaism control money and power in a very basic way? If you can potentially work and struggle for 7 days a week, Judaism comes along and says, you know what? Take 1 day off. 1/7 of one's working life is taboo to work. Why? We want to control, we want to restrict this desire for money and power. 7 days a week, a person struggling for money and power, Judaism says, you know what? Keep it down to 6. Cut it down. 1/7 of your work and your striving for money and power. Cut it down by 1/7. Imagine, a person lives 70 years, 10 years of his life was keeping Shabbat. It's amazing if you think about it over the long term. A person lives 70 years, man, 10 years Shabbat, 10 years no struggle for money or power. 10 years, it's a long time. 10 years was not spent struggling for money or power. So it's a tremendous idea behind it. And the third thing is the desire for sex. And here Judaism has various laws. We read these laws on Mincha time of Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year. What do we read in the synagogue? When everyone's mind is, again, we're controlling the desire for food in Yom Kippur, but we're also controlling the desire for sex in Yom Kippur. Why? Because sex is not allowed in Yom Kippur. One of the 5 restrictions on Yom Kippur is the marital act. Twice a year, sex is not allowed. Yom Kippur, and the other day is Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, which is a day of destruction. So the 2 days a year, we restrict this practice. But it's not just the 2 days a year. Also, the Bible tells us, in certain situations, this